Thank you. And we're away.
Okie doke.
Over to you.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Well, good evening, everyone. So Margaret's asked me to have a chat to everyone about biodiversity net gain. So for those of you who haven't met me via Zoom yet, I've been involved with the forum now for a couple of months, mainly through Margaret, as a direct result of me being best mates with her son. And she's dragged me in. I've lived in the area my entire life, apart from a little bit of a break for university. And so I've got a bit of a vested interest. My profession, I'm actually a consultant ecologist by trade, and I've been doing that for the last 15 years or so. And my firm is based in Ilkeston. I live locally, and so that's why I want to help out here. I've got no conflict of interest in regard to representing clients or anything like that, because typically I'd be sat almost on the other side of the fence, as it were, helping the house builders look at what they need to be doing and why they need to be doing it. What I'm going to introduce really is the legislation behind it, what's driving the forces, and then hopefully what I think the forum can do in sort of pushing its agenda. It is quite a dry topic because there is a lot of planning stuff, and I'm going to try and breeze through it as best I can. But to sort of give you a bit of a background, I think I'm going to try and break it up purely on the premise of having some cutesy photos every now and then, just so you're not bored of me drolling on and you get a bit of a flavour for what I do. So if I can try and move your faces there. I'm hoping we are presenting now. There we go. So there's a common lizard from one of my sites, a very very fast little critters and a lot of fun to capture. Entirely not BIA related, but there you go. There's another photo for you. So the premise of all this, net gains. I've been in the industry, like I said, about 15 years now. It is by far the biggest update in regard to ecology and planning, and is potentially one of the larger updates in planning in recent years, aside from ecology. And it's a real shift in focus, which I'm really excited about. We're in a very early stages of it at the moment, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So that is causing some problems in local authorities, and how it's implemented and what the rights and wrongs and the responsibilities are. Its basis is coming out of the NERC Act, which is a 2006 document, which took all the UK biodiversity action plans and consolidated it. And then Theresa May in her government issued the 25-year environment plan, which is really sort of set the groundwork on it all. And that was essentially, as you can see on the screen, and I have to apologise, these slides are quite text heavy, mainly because I'm doing it over Zoom, and I think it gives you the sound about all the quotes that are necessary and will help out. I know it's breaking a golden rule of presentation to have lots of words on a screen, but at least you've got something other to look at there. But yeah, essentially the 25-year environment plan to leave our natural environment in better shape than we found it, which is a very ambitious statement, but I'm pleased to sort of report that actually that's being followed up on. So the NPPF, that's National Planning Policy Framework, and then there's the Environment Bill, which I'll touch on briefly, and then obviously go into biodiversity net gain as well. So the NPPF, the big change that came about was in March of 2019. Where we were pre this update, it was very much try not to impact biodiversity. No net loss would be preferable. But there was two big changes. They were minor tweaks in words, but they were very big for the industry and planning and development in general. And the first one I've underlined there is providing net gains. So every development now must provide a net gain in biodiversity going forward. And then secondary to that is this section here, a measurable net gain. That is really critical in our understanding and what we hopefully can do. And it links to what's called the biodiversity metric. sorry, apologies. I should say as well, some of these slides I did give to a planning conference, and I've just tweaked them a bit, so I forgot that animation was in there. So there's my friend Brown long ear bat. This is one we captured doing a roof strip of a building, and we've put in a purpose-built heated bat loft for this guy and his family. I think there was 15 bats in that building in the end. So if any of you've got an interest, I have to apologise, Margaret. As you know, I'm more interested in herpetiles and small mammals, and I haven't got any nice lichen photos. I apologise, or any birds, because my ornithology is shocking, which is terrible given that I grew up in Attenborough. But there you go. So this is the biodiversity metric. Essentially, it's a very in-depth spreadsheet calculator. What it's done is taken what we used to call the Phase 1 habitat survey type, which was done by the Joint Nature Conservation Council. It's completely ripped that handbook up, and we've now got a completely new habitat classification system. The metric itself has been around for 5-6 years now, but in various forms. It started out in life in Warwickshire, and it's been adapted and amended since then. And then DEFRA have basically taken this on now in order to push through these measurable gains. And you can see it's broken up into various sections. So we've got our on-site baseline here. Now, interestingly, what's happened through the maturity of the process, they've actually taken habitat and hedgerow out. And one of the targets I set with Margaret and some of the group earlier was actually doing baseline assessments of hedgerows, and that was for a very specific reason. They took hedgerows out because what was happening in the early phases of metrics was that a developer would completely kibosh a site, but ring it with a hedgerow. And hedgerows scored highly. You'd got X many thousand meters of hedgerow, and all of a sudden they had a net gain in biodiversity. And it was obviously a skew that wasn't right, and it needed to be addressed. The way the baseline works is a botanical assessment, and the other good thing about it is it encourages developers not to kibosh a site before you get there. So again, this is good for me because quite often in my early career, you would get to site and someone had already ploughed a field. The reason why that's not such a good idea is because if you plough a field, built into the post development is I'm trying to think of the right terminology here. It skews the calculation for a new habitat. So if you've got a retained and enhanced habitat, it automatically assumes its functional biodiverse value is higher and will be higher sooner. Whereas if you have a bare blanket field with nothing in it, it's going to score you really low, and it's going to take a long time for that to mature. Now, the good thing is, and for those of you who are nervous as I am re-habitat take of HS2, they've got to use this. So they've got the same skew. So when they're claiming they've got a biodiverse gain, they're not just saying, well, we've put in 20 hectares of woodland, because that won't actually score them very well. They are actually having to do the metric against this and say what is happening. So again, and just to point out as well, with woodland, there is a negative skew already for planting woodland. You can't just say, well, I'm going to plant 2 hectares of woodland and there's my offset, because of course, as we all, biodiversity works on mosaics, but woodlands are sort of seen as the epitome of what they should, the end game. They're not. We need a range of habitats. But with woodland, what they've said is you can't just go in and plant a woodland, because again, it's going to take 30, 40, 50, 60 years for a woodland to be good. Whereas what you're planting is a bunch of 1+1 whips and weeds around them. It's not a woodland, is it? And so it skews it in that regard. So this is essentially what we look at, and we have to then work with the development. Can we get a gains in sight? Can we plan through any areas? And if not, you'll see then there's an off-site baseline. So on to my next slide. So net gain in practice. The ideal for me is can we get our 10%? And I'll come on to why 10% in a moment, because like I said, in the NPPF, all it does say at the moment is you must get a net gain. Now, that can be 0.01% better and it would qualify. Local authorities have taken varying stances. So some authorities have seen the Environment Bill coming forward and they've put in 10% within their local plans. Others haven't, and they've just sort of said, follow the NPPF and we want gains. Interestingly, places like Leeds have declared a climate emergency and they won't accept anything but 10%, whereas in other authorities, even though they say we want 10%, there is room for argument and discussion about it. And one thing I don't like about the metric at the moment, speaking as a herpetologist and small mammal sort of ecologist in primary function, that I like to put in bat houses and bat boxes and reptile refugia and the like, and they don't feature in the biodiversity metric at the moment. And there is no plans to bring them in. And that's a shame for me, because I actually think there's added value and added biodiverse value in creating those homes, but they don't get any scoring. So yeah, sorry, back onto this. Can you realistically get 10% on your site, and can we get in early enough to plan that 10% on site? That's the real game. If not, there is mechanisms, and there will be more security in mechanisms later on via the Environment Bill, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. So if you are in a position where you've done your net gain analysis and you found you've got a net loss on site, you are allowed to look to offset that outside of your site. Now that's secured under 106 funds. So 106 is often used for highways engineering works, for schools to build a new classroom because you've got too many more residents moving into the area, etc. But now they're saying that you would be able to use your biodiversity into the 106 as well, and that would have to, within a local authority, get allocated for biodiversity. Are there other areas of land within a given portfolio? That's always key to ask. I work with a lot of developers who have got sites that aren't that great, and we've said to them, well, why don't we have that? You're not really going to get any yield off it in terms of a development, but it's sat right next to a river. It's in the flood zone, so you can't do a lot with it. I could have a lot of fun with that. And looking to make those areas better. And a lot of that then links into the Lawton review of bigger, better, more joined up. And then again, I'm going to come on to this briefly as well, but the nature recovery networks, which is due to be mandated via the Environment Bill. So there are mechanisms of doing it off-site, but ideally what we want is an on-site gain. And certainly for our local authority, if we can, I want it on site, and I think there's every right to be forcing that a bit. And again, I'm kind of hopefully touch on that in a bit. My specialism, like I say, is great crested newts. I'm a registered consultant. There's only 60 of us in the country that are registered to that level, and there's something coming through called district licensing, where like Leicestershire have just signed up to this. Most LPAs by the end of this year, if not next year, will have signed up to district licensing, whereby instead of looking at these things insular as a development site for its great crested newts, local authorities will hold the license now for the entire borough, and developers pay into a contribution scheme to build ponds all over the borough in joined up networks. And I think there's an opportunity here through the nature recovery networks and biodiversity enhancements to be saying, well, we'll have some ponds as well and join up other things within that. And again, there are multiple opportunities for that, but with my sort of great crested newt specialism head on, that's where I sit. And talk of the devils, there's a female great crested newt and a male great crested newt. If you've ever not seen one, that's in a bottle trap, which is a really rudimentary piece of kit. It's quite literally a Coke bottle cut in half, the bottle inverted and put in a pond with an air bubble, and go back a few hours later and they'll be in there. This is a male. Its crest is just fallen over because it's out of water. The other common name that they used to have was the warty newt, as you can see from its skin. It's quite warty in colour. So that's basically what I do. A lot of my working days is looking after these guys. So the Environment Bill. Now this is the next big thing. This is really, for me, is the keystone piece of legislation I'm waiting for. Because at the moment, without it, we've found, and I'm having regular tete-a-tetes with local authorities at the moment who haven't got mechanisms in place to secure ecological funding, and they won't do until the Environment Bill comes forward, which is a real shame. because they're also then trying to follow the NPPF and get a gain and get a commuted sums, but they've got no mechanism to actually force that yet. Some local authorities have, and they're quite far advanced, like Warwickshire, who's been piloting biodiversity net gains for so long. They are up there, and they've got a mechanism in place with a commercial entity called the Environment Bank, and you can pay into a commuted sums developer contribution, they call it. So the Environment Bill it's going to be broad-reaching, and I think this graphic displays it beautifully, because actually everything is considered with one another, but with equal weighting. So it will cover air quality, waste, resource efficiency and water, but pertinently for me is nature and biodiversity. And they carry equal weighting. And within this, it's going to create legal binding targets that will be enforceable through a new body, which will be the Office for Environmental Protection. Now, that body is going to have a heck of a job when it starts. And they're saying at the moment that there will be a 2-year lead-in period for it to come in. And essentially what it will do is govern all of these areas, but for me, it will govern the offsetting funds and how they're going to be looked at. And it will also set in targets for every single local authority to establish its own nature recovery networks, and it will be a prosecutable fine if they don't. Now I've left this yellow highlighting in on purpose. I was going to change it when I highlighted it and put it in there as a reminder to highlight it, to change it, and then I just thought it was quite laughable that we're still talking about it not being in. But clearly we've had a pandemic, and that's not Parliament's fault. And so we were hoping, in reality, we should have had the Environment Bill late 2019, if not early 2020. Clearly a few things have got in the way of that. What's interesting here with the Environment Bill is it's gone through 2 readings in Parliament, and it's gone through committee, and it's now at report stage. So we've got another stage in Parliament before it goes to House of Lords and then gets royal assent to become legislation. What is interesting is that throughout the 2 readings to date, there's not really been any comments or any amendments or any real niggles re the biodiversity and its 10% gain that they're going to look at, which I'm quite encouraged about, because normally when you're looking at legislation, there's a lot of to and fro between the parties. But actually, although it's sad in many respects, because we're in this position and we've got to enact a legislation, but what I'm encouraged about is that there is a socio-economic need and want and desire now to actually to benefit biodiversity through development, because I think we recognise, certainly as a country, we're leading the way at the moment in securing development in a more biodiverse manner. It is a shame that we've had to come this far, but we are where we are, and it's quite encouraging. And so as a result, this has kind of got cross-party support already, which is very encouraging for me in particular. Quick still of a very, very fat badger. This was on a trail camera. I've never seen a badger so fat in all my life. This was just before winter, so he's clearly fattening up for a bit of sleep. But yeah, this was caught on one of our infrared trail cameras, and you could literally push this thing and it would have rolled for half an hour. So yeah, thought I'd share that one as well. I've got some really nice videos of badgers actually getting very inquisitive around our cameras, but I wasn't sure how well they'd play via Zoom, so I've kept them off. But so anyway, yeah, the biodiversity net gain then. So like I said, the Environment Bill will make it mandatory, and it will set the 10% net gain. Now, I'm encouraged by the 10% gain, and I'm hopeful that that's just a starter for 10. And the reason I say that is because there is a study out there at the moment to suggest that all that 10% will do is offset us to a net zero in about 30 years' time, because of existing declines that we're facing. By developing and doing these 10% gains, the two are just going to meet in the middle, because we are declining so much. So yeah, forgive my rudimentary science and explanation of a graph there, but with my hands. And my hope is that once this is in place and it's become embedded, that it will be lifted to 15, if not 20% biodiverse gains. And I think that's what needs to happen from my perspective. I think 10% is a very a sensible target. It is ambitious in the first instance, because speaking I speak, I speak with developers daily, as I'm sure you can imagine, and a lot of this, and part of me is all boo-hoo you, but a lot of developers have got land banks where they've bought land with the premise of putting on, say, 100 houses, and that's done on a validation report whereby they'll assume 100 houses based on the cost of materials, the cost of the planning application, all the background information, etc., and the cost of an end product build, and how much they can sell those houses for. And in that viability assessment, they bought those sites 5, 6, 7 years ago on that viability assessment. That hasn't then brought into this forthcoming 10% net gains and losses of units to make way for my gains, and or commuted sums to gain off site. And so it's going to cause a lot of friction in the next 2 or 3 years while it becomes stable and becomes every day. And we get a lot of kickback already, and every quote I do, I put in for a BANG calculation, and every time clients are like, "What do I really need this?" And yes, you do. Every site needs this now. So there's going to be there is going to be a bit of upset as it becomes more and more enforced via the Environment Bill, which is why I think 10% is actually a sensible but aspirational target. I would like it to be higher personally. As you can see on the screen there, it does require everyone to, well, actually it requires the Secretary of State to provide a biodiversity metric, which is why DEFRA are putting a lot of energy into the metric now. The third iteration is due out quite soon. It's been in consultation for some time now. And the interesting thing here is that it says that we are a register of sites, meaning biodiversity units can be sold and traded. The way it works at the moment is most local planning policy won't allow loss of a biodiverse asset from its area, which is quite right. But in some areas, not total, don't get me wrong, but in some areas you have a very urbanized area, and there's a movement to say, well, actually, we kind of need to, in some respects, expect a bit of a loss in that area if we can make bigger, better, more joined up elsewhere. Obviously there's lots of opinion about that matter and whether you agree with it or not, but I'm afraid that is what they're sort of pushing towards. And all of this is, like I say, bigger, better, more joined up, because certainly when I started in this, ecology was very much insular. You had to mitigate on your site. If there was a species issue, it had to be on your site, and that left little islands of mitigation and compensation areas that aren't joined up and they don't work. And I've had no end of bugbears with local authorities in years gone by where we were forced down a certain strategy, and I'd say to them, no, because look at it, if you did it there, it would make a lot more sense, but there was no mechanism to secure it, whereas this will actually at least bring that mechanism into place. And what I think is really interesting as well is that it requires 30 years of maintenance, monitoring and management of any new site, which is why I think there's an opportunity here for every local authority to be employing a biodiversity officer. And that biodiversity officer would be paid for via the commuted sums that have been arranged for the developers. And that biodiversity officer job would be to go around and make sure these are actually meeting their remit. And if not, put in they should have the funds in place to bring in the resources to sort them out and get them to where we wanted them to be in the initial plans. But that's just my soapbox moment. Here's a water vole during a translocation, and you may recognize this Pringles container. Fantastic for moving water voles, by the way. Perfect size, they just slot right in. Only if they're in there for 5-10 minutes and you've obviously got air bubbles, but yeah, they're perfect for it. Taking them from one cage and then into a translocation site. I did a huge translocation up in Rochdale, early part of my career, and we took some off site and sent them to Chester Zoo to breed them up while we were redoing the drainage of the site. And Chester Zoo rang and said, yeah, so we're doing quite well. We've got a lot more than we were anticipating. So we then had to go and find more sites in the Rochdale area to translocate them to. I'm really pleased to say that they're thriving in all 4 of the locations we chose, which is good. So nature recovery networks, that's something that will tie into local plan policy. And again, all of this is back onto the Lawton review of bigger, better, more joined up. And the nature recovery networks, as identified by Natural England, their purpose is to improve those sites we've already got, to increase the size of them, increase the number of them, and then forgive the permeability of, improve the permeability of the surrounding landscape, i.e. make corridors and connect. It's simple stuff. As an ecologist, we've been banging on about this for years, and Norman no doubt can wax lyrical about the number of times he's told people to do this. But now, finally, we are getting somewhere where it's going to be legislated. So this is the Nature Recovery Network map on Magic as it stands. For our area, you'll recognise, obviously, this is Bardills and former Gregory's Roses site over here. My bugbear at the moment is that this has quite clearly just been done quite crudely as a broad brush map, because yes, this is where we're working with TEP to discuss what they can do, but also this is HS2 land. So it's quite clearly been a bit of a broad brush cartography exercise. Obviously, this is Bardills Garden Centre. So whether Pam Bardill knows about that, she probably doesn't. And obviously, there's no statutory obligation at the moment. All these are doing at the moment is identifying core areas that could be useful and ways of linking things up. And then when you apply, if someone were to apply for a planning permission in there, they'd have to review the Nature Recovery Network, what it's been listed for, and then hopefully plan and mitigate accordingly with its habitat types. So what do I think we can do? And this is a crucial part. And again, apologies, Margaret, you've heard me wax lyrical about this a few times now, but I think there's a lot we could do as a group. So this map shows the 2 wards, and then the pink area is the boundary of the TEP HS2 review. The crude grayscale here is the nature recovery networks from the previous slide, and then the green areas are areas already identified within the local plan. The version of this that Margaret's seen, and I believe is on the forum website, was one where I've done lots of joined up lines and big blobs around it saying, well, I think these are the areas we could survey and these are the areas we could look at. And the reason, what I think we can do is we could at this point in time potentially use the biodiversity metric as in our armory. We know that something will be happening here. We know that something will be happening here. We know they need to offset. They've got no choice. The Environment Bill will be in place and they'll be judged now against the Environment Bill. Even if it's not in place if they suddenly just crop up a planning application out of thin air and chuck it in tomorrow, they'll still be judged against it coming forward, because it's such a big scheme. By the time it's actually been reviewed at committee, the Environment Bill will be in place. So they know now that they've got to get a net gain, which is why they're already talking to us about Country Park up here, because they're probably looking to offset everything up there. But what I think we could do is, 1, look at the core sites we've already got and can we improve them? But 2, look at all the new areas we want as a group, and the areas of green infrastructure we want, the highways and the byways, all the bits and bobs, fill it in with the Lawton review. Can we join it up? Well, we've shown we can. And then do a biodiversity metric on those areas. I'm not saying to do a biodiversity metric on the whole ward. I'm saying on selected areas whereby we could say, we've got, say for instance, this belt across the top of Toton here. We've got that in plan at the moment, haven't we, where there's a green wedge shown across the top. Great, absolutely perfect. Let's do a biodiversity appraisal of it now, and then do almost a rough idea of what we could do as a biodiversity area. Put that through the metric and then show them what that area is worth in terms of biodiversity units, because that's what they'll be talking about. And therefore, equally, that then talks money, because that we're saying to them, we've got an area up here we've identified as a potential net gain zone. You could get 50 or 60 odd units along this northern corridor. You could get units along here or units along here. It suddenly becomes an attractive option to them. We're talking in the language that they would appreciate. And it also shows that we know what we're talking about. And there's an option here to say, let us have more impact than you think you need to, because we've already looked at this on your behalf in many respects, and we think there's opportunities here. And I think that should make them sit up and take notice of what we want to achieve. Whether you agree or disagree, I don't know, but certainly that's where I'd be taking this at the moment. And there are other areas that we can't control, obviously in the Chetwynd barracks, but there's a lovely woodland here that we could link up with a green wedge up here. We know they've shown a green wedge coming down here and across the top here, but and again, there's ambiguities as to the ownership of these buildings here, because they're outside of MOD ownership. But I just think if we can start forcing their hand and talking their language, we'll put ourselves in a very strong position going forward. I appreciate I've probably been talking for long enough now. I'm going to leave you with one final slide, because this is the most exciting part of my career. That's not my dog, by the way. This is a wildlife detection dog. So there's 4 or 5 companies now whereby they have trained, instead of training them as bomb detection dogs, they've actually trained them to identify animals. And this little fella managed to find my great crested newt, and as you can see, there's a blurred out digger in the background. And it took him about 5 minutes, and he found a great crested newt under some scrub, and we were able to move him out of harm's way. And I just think that's really cool. There's detection dogs now for bats, all kinds of fun stuff. And yeah, I just thought I'd share that because it's quite nice. But yeah, I appreciate I've just whistle stopped at you all, and I hope it's been informative and it was what you were expecting to hear me talk about tonight. And I've not completely missed the remit, Margaret, but we'll soon find out. But yeah, over to you guys if you've got any questions. I can stop sharing. One other thing as well, sorry, marketing plug now. We've just set up a training company, and on there we've got some foundation courses in bat awareness and great crested newt awareness. So if anyone's interested, or they know a builder that should really be a bit more aware, point them in that direction. But yeah, I'll shush, and if you want to ask any questions, please feel free.
Thanks very much, Nick. That's absolutely fabulous. Really